Hey, I'm Stephanie, and I didn't mean to become a collector. Some people set out to build a collection. They love the hunt, the curation, and the display. Others, like me, just wake up one day and realize that their stuff has multiplied like rabbits or Sephora points. Whether you arrived there by accident or design, you might hit a moment where you stop and think, is this just a joyful pastime, or is it doing more emotional heavy lifting than I thought? Today we're talking about collecting. Is it a harmless hobby, a joyful ritual, a pretty name for hoarding, or at some level, is it all of these things? My own collection didn't start with figurines or rare coins. It all began with eyeshadow, and then some lipstick, and then more eyeshadow. When I first got into makeup, and for a long time afterwards, I called it my kit, not my collection. And if you've seen some of my earliest YouTube videos, you might remember that phase. The word kit just felt like the most accurate thing to call it, because I was a touring musician, singing and playing gigs, and I needed a kit backstage with things like foundation and lipstick and eyeshadow, all the doodads. But something happened. My kit grew, and it was understandable. At first, I really didn't have all that much, so I would buy certain things to create very specific looks. And then there were the travel delays and the lost luggage and a forgotten lipstick here and a lost concealer there. There were so many sensible reasons to make a quick purchase and ultimately end up with a lot of similar items. But I got used to those purchases, and then it was because I was browsing, or I liked the packaging, or there was a new formula, or oh my gosh, that eyeshadow's limited edition. Little by little, it stopped being a kit and became a collection. But I didn't call it that, not yet. Because in my mind, a collection is something that you put on display. It's not something you use. And I was using it, wasn't I? I think a lot of people go through this subtle shift. We start off with purpose, maybe make some reasonable purchases that make sense, but we don't really have a master plan, and then we just take a bunch of reasonable baby steps that add up quickly. But then the items begin to collect. Not always deliberately, more like rainwater in the lowest part of your yard. You didn't put it there, but there it is, gathering. At some point, I realized I wasn't just using makeup anymore. I was keeping it. I was saving it, admiring it. And in some categories, especially eyeshadow, it stopped being about utility and it started being about having. Something about that didn't sit right with me, though I couldn't explain why at the time. And I think part of it was because it wasn't like I had some sudden, gigantic revelation. It was more like a slowly growing feeling of unease or overwhelm. Once I started becoming more aware of that, I just knew I didn't think of myself as a collector. That was like a completely different category of person to me. People who curate rare things, who display them and protect them. I was just a makeup lover, right? So let's talk semantics. We tend to associate the word collector with ideas like expert knowledge, curation, or intention, but we associate the word hoarder with ideas of messiness, lack of control, or even shame. But those two things are both points on the same spectrum. There's a difference between collecting for joy or collecting to cope, and I think a lot of people live somewhere in between, in an area that I guess I think of as sentimental stockpiling. So where do we draw the line? Is it about how much we own, or is it about how we organize it? Or maybe if we can remember each individual item that we have, or if we use it? Honestly, I think it might have more to do with how it makes you feel, because some collections spark joy, but some sneak up on you and suffocate you when you least expect it. If you've ever felt guilt over what you own, or maybe shame for not using it all, I don't think that necessarily means that you're broken or you've made some massive mistake. I think it might just mean that there's something deeper calling for your attention, and it's totally okay to meet that with curiosity instead of judgment. So why do we do it, consciously or not? Sometimes I think it's about the having, the feeling of being prepared or having a sense of completeness, or maybe the thrill of the search. Sometimes a collection becomes part of our identity, not just what we like, but who we are. It says something about our taste, our priorities, or a place in our community, and that can feel empowering. Or it can feel mildly pressuring if we feel like we're performing for some imaginary audience in our heads. And online, it can feel like your collection proves your credibility. Like the more you have, the more you know. For makeup, for example, the more different kinds of formulas you've tried, the broader your knowledge is of all the options out there. So I can completely understand why so many people gravitate towards reviewers with gigantic collections. But for those of us who aren't professional reviewers, that's a tricky place to be when enjoyment gets tangled up in identity like that. And it's not just us. Social media connects us with people who share our special interests, which is wonderful, but the platforms themselves reward visual abundance. Algorithms are constantly encouraging us to grow our collections regardless of our deeper needs and wants. And sometimes I think it's about something we ourselves can't quite name yet. If you collect, why do you do it? I think I started partially because I knew a lot of people who collected experiences. They traveled a lot, chased novelty, made memories, and that all sounds so good when you hear it like that. But I traveled a lot for work, and I collected a lot of very rich experiences that way. By the time I had days off, the last thing I wanted to do was get on yet another plane. I had been there, I had done that, and I had seen how quickly even the best moments fade. The details start to blur, the feelings pass, and the memories kind of gradually slip away. And maybe I was just exhausted, but I started to want something else, something to hold, not in my head, but in my hands, because memories can fade, but stuff stays. And for a while, that felt right. For me, I think it had something to do with an unmet need. Every one of us is walking around with some unmet need we're trying to navigate. It's just part of being human. And often those needs show up in our relationship with our belongings, in the drive to possess, to surround ourselves with evidence of beauty or preparedness or nostalgia or abundance. But those needs can show up in different ways, depending on what we're feeling inside. Maybe we're experiencing feelings of fear or longing or insecurity. But it can also depend on what's happening outside of us. Maybe there's a change in income or access or influence. And when those conditions shift, we can find ourselves sliding along a spectrum we didn't even know we were on. I know that I personally have gone from owning practically nothing to owning so much makeup that it overwhelmed me, and now I'm trying to find a middle ground. I'm aiming for what I like to think of as a tiny pile of happy abundance, enough to enjoy, but not so much that it haunts me or my bank account. Now, I didn't mean to become a collector, but once I realized that was in fact what I had become, I decided to change a couple of things because I wasn't entirely comfortable with that identity for whatever reason. So one of the first things I changed was my language. Instead of referring to my makeup as my kit, I began calling it my collection because I just felt like that was more accurate. Because I believe that the language we use and the way we frame things has a huge impact on how we interact with ourselves and the world, including our belongings. I have a whole video about it here, and I'll link it in the show notes. So using more accurate language could help me get to the bottom of things faster as to why I was feeling this sense of overwhelm and unease. And the second thing I did was start asking myself questions like, what purpose is this collection serving? Is it joy? Is it comfort? Is it a sense of nostalgia? Or am I trying to soothe some sort of fear? Because a kit is for use. A collection can be used, but usually hints at something deeper. And hoarding is what happens when letting go feels unsafe or maybe even impossible. And I say that with care and curiosity because I have felt that slippery slope beneath my feet. What began for me as a professional creative tool grew into a hobby and then morphed into something much bigger than I expected. But once I named it, I could reshape it. And that gives me the chance to make sure that it's something that continues to bring me joy and not a sense of overwhelm. After all of that buildup, I wanted to feel good about my collection again, not by getting rid of everything, but by curating it with more care and by being more intentional about what I choose to add and when. I still have a collection, and there's a lot to learn about that. Collections can bring joy, spark creativity, help us to mark time, and even build community. Sometimes what we keep isn't what we actually want right now. It's more about preserving a version of ourselves that we're not ready to let go of yet. And that's not wrong. wrong. That's human. This whole discussion isn't about having less. It's about knowing why we have what we have. For me, a healthy collection feels energizing, not draining. It's something that inspires me to play, not to avoid it or constantly reorganize it. There isn't one right way to do it or one right size. It's more about a feeling of alignment. But I am working on making my collection feel more like a kit again. A slightly overstocked, thoughtfully curated, definitely indulgent kit. I don't mind having more than I need. I just want to make sure that I don't own more than I can realistically enjoy. I want to indulge, but I want to collect in a way that feels thoughtful. That's how I'm defining a healthy collection for me for now. Not the smallest amount possible, but the most joy per square inch that I can reasonably get. Whether you're a minimalist, a maximalist, or somewhere in between, your stuff is saying something, and our response can change as our needs, values, and capacity do. I think a lot of us follow a similar arc. It starts with curiosity, it grows with enthusiasm, and then it peaks at overload. And if we pay attention, it can settle into clarity. I think that curve is how we learn what looks like enough for us. Because what feels like too much to me might feel just right to you, or vice versa. And even that's subject to change over time. Something that felt fun last year might feel heavy now, or something that used to feel like a lifeline might start to feel like a leash. That doesn't mean you failed. It just means you've changed. And you're allowed to change your mind about stuff, about how much you want, about what you're keeping, about who you want to become. I don't think it helps to judge our relationship with stuff either, ours or anyone else's. We're all carrying different histories, and honestly, half the time, I think we don't even know ourselves what we're trying to soothe or prove or protect. So if you've ever stared at your collection wondering, what does all this mean? You're in good company. Whether you're currently in the thick of things or you've already been through this reckoning, I would love to hear what is helping or has helped you. Was there a certain moment that made you pause or a single item that felt like a turning point? Your story might be just what someone needs to hear because none of us have all the answers. We're all just stumbling through this. But if you'd rather talk about it in a more sheltered space, I have discussion threads over on Patreon, including a free membership tier. I'll link that in the show notes. If this resonated with you, feel free to like, subscribe, and check out this video. Thank you for being here, and thank you to my Adagio angels for making content like this possible. Next week, we'll discuss completionism, the overachieving cousin of collecting. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful week, and we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.